Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing incredibly well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me for part 3 of our story tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And this is a wonderful story about a woman who is obsessed with shoplifting, and she thinks she's kept it a big secret from her family, but she realizes to her horror that her own daughter is following by her example. So let's find out what happens next. Sheila was now completely stumped. She didn't know how to react to Lily's indignant outburst. How could she possibly condemn her daughter for doing something that she frequently did herself? She was supposed to lead by example, by being a principled role model for her daughter, and not encouraging her to become a thief like she was. But she had thought she'd kept her shoplifting practices cloak and dagger. The last thing she'd ever expected was for Lily to know about her shoplifting exploits. It seemed against all the odds that her daughter Lily not only knew where she stashed away her stolen goods after she had taken them, but had actually physically witnessed her in the act of stealing stuff from a department store, stuff that was not hers. Sheila Morris was suddenly convicted with a surge of overwhelming guilt. This was all her fault. She had caused this mess. What kind of an example had she set for her daughter? If Lily had witnessed her stealing, how could she possibly reprimand her for doing the very same thing? Sheila knew she needed to set down some boundaries for her daughter. She didn't want Lily to become like her. This would be no way for her child to live. Sheila was inwardly cursing herself for all the years she had stolen from people and from department stores, and the euphoric pleasure it had obviously brought her. But now she felt personally chastised and convicted, for now things were very, very different indeed, for she was teaching her daughter some of her very bad habits that could potentially ruin her daughter's life and sabotage her future. She needed to nip this in the bud right now. She couldn't allow her daughter to become like her under any circumstances. She'd been such a fool, she told herself, for if you did something wrong, it tends to come back to bite you in ways you never imagined possible. "Look, sweetheart," said Sheila, "I don't like what I do. It's wrong, and I'm very ashamed that you personally witnessed me shoplifting. I really am." "Then why do you do it, Mum?" asked Lily, staring at her mother with wide, questioning eyes. "Why would you do something you don't like, that you believe is wrong? It doesn't make sense to me." "That's a very good question, sweetheart. I don't know the answer to it," said Sheila. "I just know it gives me a thrill when I take things that don't belong to me. But I've got to stop. If your father knew about what I do, well, there is no telling how he would react. I dread to think about it. He'd be so ashamed of me, and rightly so." "You think he'd divorce you, don't you?" said Lily. "Is that what you're worried about, Mum? Don't be silly. Dad would never ever leave you. He loves you too much. Besides, you know what Dad's like. He takes his marriage vows extremely seriously. He's an old stick in the mud. He does everything by the book and has absolutely no sense of humour whatsoever. But you're different, Mum. You live on the edge, and it's very exciting. I want to be exactly like you." At her daughter's horrifying words that pierced through Sheila's skin like a sharp injectable, Sheila suddenly stopped her car in the middle of the road so that it stalled for a brief moment, as if even her car had taken offence to her daughter's words. This was turning out to be a rather unfortunate day. At first Sheila had been caught shoplifting, well, very nearly, and now her daughter had stolen her best friend's dress, claiming she wanted to become a thief like her mother, because living on the edge was oh so exciting. Sheila's heart began to pound in her chest rather violently. She wondered how best to rein in her daughter's wild ideas that had been brought on by her unbridled influences. Sheila pulled her Land Rover to one side of the road, into a park position. Her face was now dappled with grave concern, for the last thing she wanted for her daughter was to become like her, and get her kicks from stealing things that did not belong to her, as this was no way for her daughter to live a productive life. So what kind of an influence had she been on her daughter, she wondered? Ma'am, we're nearly home. Why are you stopping your car in the middle of the street like this? Her daughter said, rolling her eyes in exasperation. Because, love, I need to talk to you. And I need to talk to you right now. It is so important we have a discussion about this. You taking your best friend's dress is extremely unsettling for me. Very unsettling indeed. I can't believe you did such a terrible thing. You have got to return Brittany's dress back to her. You do realise that, I hope. I don't know what possessed you to do such a foolish thing. But why are you upset with me, Mum? I'm only doing what you do. And besides, I felt really good taking Brittany's dress from her. It'll wipe the smug smile off her face when she's realised it's gone. So she won't look like such a princess for her grandfather's 80th birthday after all. And I'm glad about that. She deserves everything she gets. She's so full of herself. You can't talk about your best friend with such disdain, love. As if you want to punish her for being happy about a pretty dress that she'll be wearing to her grandfather's party. It's really disgusting to be so jealous, love. It really does not become you in any way. And it's got to stop. It's not good, love. And the last thing I want is for you to become like me. Shoplifting is wrong in every sense of the word. It's appalling to take things that do not belong to you. Even the Bible tells us we should not steal. It's a criminal offence, and if you get caught, you could end up with a criminal conviction. And I don't want that for you, love, under any circumstances, because it would only jeopardise your career in the future. No one ever wants to hire someone with a criminal record. So don't you dare start following my abysmal lead and stealing things from people or stores. I have a problem, love, and I recognise that. I intend to get help for it because I'm influencing you with my bad habits. So I've also got to stop this. But you never ever get caught, Mum. I can be like you, can't I? I can become skilled at stealing stuff without ever being seen. We could do it together as a team, Mum. Help each other out. It would be great fun. I hope you're joking, love, because you and I are not going to start stealing together as a team. In fact, from this day forward, I intend to stop stealing for good and put that part of my life strictly behind me. Believe me, love, I very nearly, on more than one occasion, have been caught. I'm lucky that up to now, I've never been charged. But if I continue down this precarious path, I'll end up with a criminal record, and I don't want that for you. If you know the adage, when you play with fire, you get burnt. Well, let me tell you something for nothing, love. That's absolutely true. Never was a truer word ever spoken. I'm very concerned about what you've done. For goodness sake, Lily, Brittany is your best friend. You need to take that beautiful dress of hers right back to her and somehow put it somewhere where she might find it and think that she misplaced it in some way. You don't want her to think you stole it from her. You're going to discreetly have to give it back to her. You say she tried her dress on in front of you to show you what she was going to wear for her grandfather's 80th birthday party. You didn't even bother to tell her how pretty she looked, because it was just too much for you to do that. When she goes back to her closet and sees her dress is gone, she will know, Lily, that you took it. She'll connect the dots. She's not stupid. Imagine for a moment, Lily, how discouraged, disappointed and betrayed Brittany will feel if she believes you've done this to her. It could jeopardize your friendship for good. She'll never be able to trust you again. Surely you don't want that. No, she won't think I stole it, Mum. The Jenkins family have a cleaner. She comes in every day. She'll think the cleaner stole it from her. I know she will. She won't believe I did it. Sheila Morris sighed with frustration. Are you crazy, love? Do you really want to get the poor woman the Jenkins hired to clean their house to be sacked on your account? Are you absolutely insane? That would be a cruel, extremely malicious thing for you to do. And if that doesn't prick your conscience, I despair with you, because I don't know what will. The way I see it, you have two choices. Either you own up to Brittany and tell her you took her dress in a moment of unbridled jealousy, or you return it to her very discreetly, so she thinks she somehow managed to misplace it. But we need to get it back to her as soon as we possibly can, in order to right this wrong." "But I don't want to give her dress back to her," Lily protested indignantly. "You don't understand, Mum, what she's like. She's so full of herself, especially now. She couldn't stop smugly going on about how I will be at school, while she's having fun in New York. She's going to go to her grandfather's party at the Waldorf Astoria, where it's being hosted. Her family's going to stay at a fancy hotel in New York, and they're going to visit the theatre there, and some fancy eating places as well. It's not fair." "Good God, love, listen to yourself," said Sheila Morris, looking horrified. "Look at you, Lily. You are green at the gills. I've never seen anything like it. I underestimated how badly jealous you are of Brittany, and that is absolutely ridiculous." "I'm not jealous," said Lily, pulling a face. "Yes, you are, love, and it's ugly. You should want good things for your best friend. You're behaving like someone who's impoverished and doesn't have a good life. We're a very wealthy family, love. You've never ever wanted for anything. I could take you to New York tomorrow or any other time you like. And as for the dress that you've stolen from Brittany, I can get you a much better one than that, made up especially for you. And you can wear it on a special occasion. You have absolutely no excuse to be jealous. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself." Lily Morris sulked the rest of the way home, although it wasn't very far to go. Her mother started up the engine and drove down the road back to their bungalow, for it would seem her mother's salient words had hit a raw nerve for Lily. She suddenly knew that stealing her best friend's dress was wrong and extremely vulgar, in every sense of the word. What if her mother was absolutely right, and her act of extreme selfishness, brought on by a touch of the green-eyed monster, seriously severed her relationship with Brittany for good? What if Brittany refused to speak to her ever again, because of a stupid dress? What if a fancy piece of material drove a wedge between their friendship? Suddenly Lily Morris was hit with the full horrifying ramifications of what she'd actually done. What a complete idiot she'd been to take Brittany's special dress, which clearly meant so much to her best friend. But when Lily had seen Brittany modelling the dress that she was going to wear to her grandfather's party, held at the Waldorf Astoria, she had been overcome with a burning desire to take the dress away from her, because then it might wipe the self-satisfied smug smile off her friend's face, who thought at that moment that she was the bee's knees, simply because Mrs. Patchett, the headmistress, had agreed to give her a couple of days off school. Lily Morris was now realising in hindsight, as her mother's words started to sink in, that maybe stealing wasn't actually all it was cracked up to be. Her mother was right. Taking things came at a large price and a huge cost. Although she'd seen her mother shoplifting many times before, she realised with a heavy heart losing Brittany's friendship was a price that she was not willing to pay. Brittany was her very best friend. The two of them were closer than sisters. Lily had allowed her extreme jealousy to overcrowd her common sense. What on earth had she done? She was clandestinely wishing she could backtrack in the last hour of her life, so that she could have resisted the temptation of stuffing Lily's party dress into her school satchel. Now the question was, should she come clean to Brittany and tell her the truth, that she'd been seething with jealousy about the fact that she'd been granted a couple of days off school by the headmistress, Mrs. Patchett, who wasn't exactly known for giving people preferential treatment of any kind, and yet she had unhesitantly given Brittany time off, which really had served to rub Lily up the wrong way, for she felt it was all so desperately unfair, as if Mrs. Patchett was biased and partisan towards Brittany over and above the rest of the pupils at school. It would be so humiliating to reveal to Brittany the extent of her resentfulness and spite. If she could get the dress back to Lily without her knowing about it, that would be a much better solution. But the question was, how did she go about doing that? Brittany Jenkins. Brittany Jenkins was bubbling over with excited enthusiasm about her trip to New York in a couple of weeks' time. She'd been to New York a couple of times before, but this trip would be extra special, for her grandfather was having his 80th birthday that was going to be celebrated at the Waldorf Astoria, which was a grandiose venue, to say the very least. Brittany knew what her brand-new velvety blue dress would make her look like, She'd feel like a princess wearing it. Things had gone better for her than she'd ever imagined possible, almost as if all the planets had been perfectly aligned, like the planet Jupiter, for example, that is always making an appearance when good fortune breaks out in your lives. Perhaps Jupiter was in her star chart this month, she wondered. Her mother believed in such things. Her mother was very passionate about astrology. It had been a miracle that her headmistress, Mrs. Prt3of, had said that of course she should take time off school to celebrate her grandfather's 80th birthday, which was a milestone and a very important celebration that should not be missed under any circumstances, and hearing that had been music to Brittany's ears. Mrs. Prt3of was a scrupulously severe, very strict headmistress in every sense of the word, and in Brittany's young life she'd never met anyone as fearsome or as intimidating as her, for she was one of those people that commanded the greatest of respect, and no one dared mess her around. Pupils at school were terrified of taking a trip to the headmistress's office for bad behaviour, as Mrs. Prt3of would tolerate no nonsense and leave them quaking in their boots, for her sobering words of condemnation and rebuke could make anybody feel so small that they'd lightly wish the ground would swallow them whole. Mrs. Prt3of, known by some of the pupils as the Dragon, had zero tolerance towards parents who allowed their children to take time off school, unless of course they were genuinely sick, and if that were the case she demanded a doctor's certificate by way of proof, as a mother's word was not reliable enough. Yet when Brittany had gone to speak to Mrs. Prt3of to ask her about her grandfather's birthday party, Mrs. Prt3of hadn't hesitated in telling her that of course she could go, and for Mrs. Prt3of to be so reasonably accommodating was practically unheard of. Ostensibly both pupils and teachers would always describe her as formidable at the best of times, but Brittany had known that even intimidating people, such as Mrs. Prt3of, were still human underneath the veneer they presented to the world. But even so, she had been unduly surprised by how warm-hearted, mellow, and completely understanding Mrs. Prt3of had been towards her. Indeed, Brittany's little heart had been pounding a dime to a dozen when she had very reluctantly and apprehensively knocked on the headmistress's door. At the time she had half a mind to run away as fast as she could when she heard Mrs. Prt3of's voice responding to her knock. "I can't do this," she told herself, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins into a flight and fight response, which gave her the overwhelming tugging desire to run. But somehow she held herself together by taking in some very deep breaths and remaining resolutely still. "Come in," Mrs. Prt3of had called. Brittany's legs wobbled beneath her as she slowly but surely opened the door to enter Mrs. Prt3of's office. She was terrified, so much so that she was practically trembling in her shoes. She felt rather like an endangered rabbit that had entered a lion's enclosure, conspicuous and extremely vulnerable. She quickly ran a hand on her ponytail to try and straighten it, and to make sure that her blue ribbon was still firmly in place. It would be inconceivable to enter the headmistress's office without wearing a blue ribbon in your hair, especially if it was long, as Mrs. Prt3of took presentation extremely seriously, and would not abide slapdash sloppiness of any kind, especially in a pupil's deportment. Mrs. Prt3of beckoned for her to take a seat. Brittany had been extremely glad to sit on the chair, even though she sat up with her back as straight as a pencil and her fingers clasped tightly together into two clammy fists, for her nerves were getting the better of her, and she could feel a prickle of sweat developing on the back of her neck, as her body became very hot and flustered. She hadn't wanted Mrs. Prt3of to see how terrified she was. She had told herself again and again that Mrs. Prt3of was not going to eat her alive, was nothing to be feared. Even her mother had told her to imagine Mrs. Prt3of at her desk naked, and then she wouldn't seem so threatening. "If you do that, she'll seem much more human," she had told her daughter. But try as she might, Brittany couldn't imagine Mrs. Prt3of naked. The vision was impossible to entertain in her mind, because Mrs. Prt3of was so prim and proper, she didn't seem like a regular human being. What if Mrs. Prt3of refused her request, she wondered, her skin burning so much that she was certain she had gone bright red. "Ah, Brittany Jenkins, it's you. So what do I owe this pleasure?" said Mrs. Prt3of. A smile was now twitching on the corners of her lips. Brittany had never seen Mrs. Prt3of smile before, so she was taken completely off guard. Normally the stern, draconian headmistress looked almost boot-faced and rather unapproachable, but the smile appeared to have lit up her eyes. Maybe she was human after all, Brittany thought to herself, feeling a small rush of relief, fanning her trepidation, like a cool current of fresh air. "I understand you have a private matter that you want to discuss with me, of a personal nature. So I'm curious to learn what it is," said Mrs. Patchett, her brown eyes dappled with flecks of green that grew round behind the tortoise-shell spectacles that she was wearing. Lily felt very conspicuous, as if she was a goldfish in a round glass bowl, being observed very intrusively by a pair of shrewd eyes. For a moment the words refused to come out of her mouth. She opened and closed her mouth, but nothing appeared to come out. "Speak up, young lady," said Mrs. Patchett. "I may look like the devil incarnate, but I assure you I'm not going to bite. Tell me what it is you've come to see me about, young lady." Brittany stumbled awkwardly on her words, but finally they did manage to come out. My mother told me to come and see you about this important matter," she stammered. "My grandfather, you see, he's turning 80 years old, in 2 weeks' time to be exact." "Your grandfather is turning 80 years old," said Mrs. Patchett, raising one of her arched manicure's brows. "Well, that's an impressive milestone to accomplish, isn't it? Well done to him, I say. But why does this concern me, Brittany dear?" "It's just, Mrs. Patchett, my grandfather, you see, he lives in New York. His birthday's on Friday evening. It's been held at the Waldorf Astoria. He's invited lots of people, including me, my brother, my mother and father." "Well, of course he'd invite you. You're close family, are you not? How perfectly lovely. And what a delightful venue to host a party at," said Mrs. Patchett. "Go on. What is it you want to ask me, Brittany? Be pacific, will you?" "Well, I was wondering, Mrs. Patchett, if I could take both Thursday and Friday off school so that we can fly to New York on Wednesday evening to prepare for my grandfather's birthday. We'd like to be there ahead of time if that's possible, 'cause there's quite a lot to do." "But of course you can take a couple of days off, Brittany. And thank you for asking me this in person, rather than getting your parents to call on your behalf. I do hate it when pupils get their parents to do their dirty work for them. Anyone would think I had a nasty bite." Brittany couldn't believe how nice Mrs. Patchett was being towards her. But when she shared her good news to her best friend Lily Morris, and told her how terrified she'd been to go and see the headmistress in person, how she'd been so affrighted she'd nearly lost her nerve and run away, she recounted how Mrs. Patchett had agreed to her request at once. Lily did not seem pleased to hear how well things had turned out for Brittany. On the contrary, she seemed bitter and resentful, abruptly insinuating rather rudely, in not so many words, that she believed Brittany was unfairly favoured by Mrs. Patchett, and by all the other teachers at school as well, who would never refuse her any request, as all the teachers liked her, and she could do no wrong as far as they were concerned. "Don't be silly, Lily. I don't know where you got that crazy idea from. I'm sure if you'd asked Mrs. Patchett for a couple of days off school to go to your own grandfather's 80th birthday, she'd have happily agreed to give you the time off like she did for me. People think Mrs. Patchett is always going to refuse them any request. But I think the dragon has a heart after all." Lily pulled a face. "I don't think that's true," she said. "Mrs. Patchett is a dragon. She breathes out fire, I'm telling you. She's obnoxious in every sense of the word, especially to the pupils. But you, for some reason, have her eating out of your hand, like all the other teachers do. And I'm sorry, but it's not right. It's not remotely fair. It stinks." "Lily, what you say is not true," Brittany had insisted. "You have no idea how terrified I was to ask Mrs. Patchett for the time off. I was shaking in my boots, let me tell you. I thought she was going to say to me that I should take a flight to New York after school on Friday and then go to the party from there, without taking any time off school. And she could have said that, but she didn't. I think her bark is a lot worse than her bite, I really do. And people have automatically assumed her to be a lot more formidable than she actually is. Mrs. Patchett may not breathe out fire to you," Lily had protested, "but if I asked her for the same favour, she'd have refused me. I know she would." Brittany had been extremely discouraged to hear Lily talk about her, as if she could click her fingers like magic, and the teachers would invariably come running, agreeing to her every request, because none of that was true. Nevertheless, there was no point in arguing with Lily on this one. Her best friend doggedly seemed to be very aggrieved, and had drifted into a big sulk. Brittany decided that she needed to change the subject quickly. She could see Lily was not remotely happy, and was looking decidedly sorry for herself, as if in some way Lily's good news had served to upset her greatly. Brittany thought she'd cheer Lily up by showing her her beautiful velvety blue dress that she would be wearing for her grandfather's party. Surely that would lift her spirits. Brittany asked Lily to close her eyes, and then she'd put on the dress to model for her best friend. She had done some elegant twirls for Lily, to show her how beautiful the dress was, but Lily's stinking mood became even more volatile. She seemed to look increasingly disgruntled. Brittany was certain she had observed a flicker of jealousy wash over Lily's face, which she couldn't understand. She'd never seen Lily look so obviously peeved before. She rarely was in a fine mood that day. Why would Lily Morris, who could have anything she wanted in the entire world, as both of her parents were stinky rich and extremely affluent, be jealous of the likes of her? "I'm imagining it," she told herself fiercely. "Lily and I are the very best of friends. She'd only want the best for me, I know she would. Of course she's happy for me that I'm going to New York." It had been a relief, though, to hear the sound of Mrs. Morris's horn blowing outside the Georgian house, as Lily, for the first time in a long time, was happy to see the back of her best friend. As after she'd told Lily about her trip to New York, and shown her her beautiful dress that she intended to wear, Lily Morrison had shut down. She hadn't even told Brittany that she looked nice, and that her dress was pretty. Instead, she'd stared blankly at the dress and said, "So you're wearing that, are you?" And she said it in such a way that it made Brittany think she didn't even like her dress, and her scathing indifference had been very hurtful indeed. Brittany knew her best friend was feeling aggrieved, because she thought the headmistress, Mrs. Patchett, favoured her above other pupils, when nothing could be further from the truth. Lily was most sure if the boot were on the other foot, and Lily needed to take a couple of days off school to go to New York for her own grandfather's 80th birthday, then Mrs. Patchett would likewise have obliged her request and happily given her the time off. So why was Lily being obnoxiously unreasonable and so incredibly objectionable? Yes, it was true that the school was very strict, with dozens of rules, especially about time taken off for pupils, but there were always exceptions to those rules. It would have been nice if Lily Morris could have been happy for her, but it was obvious she was inwardly furiously venting about what she considered to be favouritism on the headmistress's part. She was like a dog with a bone, who would not let her grievances go. Brittany had watched Lily Morris from her front door, charging off towards her mother's Land Rover, when she heard the horn blowing. It was almost as if Lily was eager to leave the house, as if she couldn't get away from Brittany fast enough, but the feeling was mutual. She had never behaved in this incongruous way before. Usually she was reluctant to leave Brittany's house, but now she wanted to create as much distance between the two of them as possible, and the wider the distance the better. Brittany had politely stood in the doorway and waved goodbye to Mrs. Morris, and Lily had flung herself into the passenger-side seat next to her mother, and not even given her a second glance, not even acknowledged her, or so much as waved at her. What was wrong with Lily? Why was she so incredibly embittered about Brittany going to New York? Why couldn't she be happy for her? Brittany returned to her bedroom, feeling slightly despondent and rather flat, rather like a bottle of fizz that has lost its sparkle. She loved spending time with Lily Morris, who always made her laugh, for they spent many fun-filled times together, and were usually inseparable, but on this occasion the afternoon had been riddled with tension, and Brittany had never experienced that before, almost as if an awkwardness had permeated their friendship. She decided she'd take another peek at the dress she was going to wear for her grandfather's 80th birthday. It was so gorgeous, and seeing the dreamy, velvety material of the dress would physically lift her spirits and put her in a decidedly good mood, and she needed that lift right now. She couldn't help imagine what people might say about her magnificent dress at the party, for she knew she'd never owned a dress that was more beautiful. Lily sighed rather sadly, as she opened her closet up, expecting to see the beautiful dress she intended to wear for her grandfather's 80th birthday bash, hanging on a hanger proudly. But when she opened the closet, the dress was all but gone. Where was it? She began to panic. For a moment she felt as if she was completely losing her mind. "But I know I put my dress back in the closet, just over there, in its usual spot. I modelled it for Lily, and then I put it back. But where has it got to? But dresses don't grow legs and go walkabout, do they?" In a mad, somewhat frenzied panic, Brittany began to abruptly pull out all the neatly folded clothes out of her closet, throwing shoes and dresses indiscriminately over her bed. Her party dress had to be somewhere, she thought. Where had it got to? "What on earth is going on here?" said Amber Jenkins, entering her daughter's bedroom, only to see that Brittany's normally pristine, neat bedroom looked like it had been hit by a raging tornado, for dresses and clothes were messily scattered around the place in large puddles. Mrs. Jenkins had never known the room to look this dishevelled before, but her daughter appeared to be frantically searching through her stuff, as if looking for something with a desperate urgency, like someone might look for an EpiPen if they've had an allergic, life-threatening reaction to something. She could see her daughter appeared to be in quite a state. What was going on with her, she wondered. Brittany was so caught up in her desperate search to find her missing dress that she barely noticed her mother standing there in the doorway, watching her, wearing on her pale face an expression of complete confoundment. Amber Jenkins repeated herself, raising her voice so her daughter might hear her. "What on earth is going on in here, Brittany? You look as if you've turned your entire bedroom into a jumble sale. The place is a decided mess. I've never seen anything like it. This is most unlike you. You're normally so tidy and so very ordered. What's going on with you, sweetheart?" Brittany looked up at her mother, her face reddening. "Mum, I've lost the dress I'm going to wear to Grandpa's birthday party. I put it on a hanger in my closet, and now it's gone. It's vanished." "Of course it's not vanished, love. It must be somewhere around here. But frankly, I'm not surprised you can't find it. This bedroom of yours looks like a bomb has hit it. But I'm most sure when you put your things tidily away in your closet that you will find it. It's got to be there somewhere. You've probably forgotten where you put it." "What's going on in here?" asked Brittany's brother George. He was 2 years older than his sister. George's jaw dropped right open as he entered Brittany's bedroom. Like his mother, he was so used to his sister being fastidiously tidy at all times, so much so, in fact, that he often teased her about her need for things to be just so. So to see Brittany's bedroom in such disarray was nothing short of bewildering for him. Mrs. Amber Jenkins shook her head. "Your sister's thrown a bit of a wobbly, dear. She thinks she's lost the dress that she's going to wear to your grandfather's birthday party in a couple of weeks' time. But I'm sure it's there. Is it any wonder she can't find it in this mess? Oh, goodness gracious me, is that the time?" she said, glancing down at her watch. "I better get those potatoes peeled. They're not going to peel themselves, are they?" And with that she exited the room. George remained in the doorway. He watched his sister carefully folding up her clothes to put back neatly in her closet. She seemed caught up in her own little bubble, but he could see the disquieted expression on his sister's face, and knew very well she was visibly upset about something. And he hated seeing her like this, for he was always protective towards his younger sister. "Mum's right, sis. Don't look so sad. Your dress must be there somewhere. When did you last see it in your closet? Try and remember." Brittany looked up at her brother and frowned. "Well, I was showing my dress to Lily. I modelled it for her. But I don't even know why I bothered to do that. She didn't even say my dress was pretty. I then put it away in the closet, and I hung it on a hanger. And now it's gone." "You don't think," said George, looking a little awkward. "I don't think what?" "Well, that Lily could have taken your dress. Because it's unlike you to not know where you put it. You're never absent-minded, are you?" "But she wouldn't steal my dress, George. We're the best of friends. Why would she do an ugly thing like that?" Maybe because she's jealous." "No," said Brittany, shaking her head furiously. "Brittany may be many things, but she's not a thief." "I don't know," said George. Don't get me wrong. I like Lily, but she's a bit self-entitled, isn't she? And sometimes I get the impression she's quite jealous of you. That's crazy. Why would she be jealous of me? Well, you're better at sports than she is for a start. You get better grades at school, and you're much prettier than her. I guess there's quite a bit of jealousy about that with her. Well, at least I think there is. When people are jealous, they do mean things to the person that has made them feel that way. You mean you think Lily would take my dress just to spite me? Are you crazy? Why would she do a thing like that? I do think she'd take your dress to spite you, said George. I know you think the stars grow out of her backside, but I think Lily is capable of being spiteful, if needs must. I'm sure of it, in fact. Well, I will admit, she wasn't happy about me going to Grandpa's birthday party in New York. She told me Mrs. Patchett, our headmistress, favoured me because she'd given me a couple of days off. She went into quite a sulk about it, actually. Well, there you go, then. I think you can safely say the mystery of your missing dress is now fully solved. If she took my dress, how can I ever trust her to be my friend again? Best friends don't do this to each other, do they? How am I going to get my dress back? I can hardly accuse her of being a thief, can I? Why not? It's obvious that she's the one who took it, said George. I'd put money on it. You modelled the dress for her, didn't you? You put it back in your wardrobe, and now it's gone. Do the math, sis. I know you don't want to admit this to yourself, because you love Lily, but she took your dress. Brittany knew that her brother was absolutely right. She didn't want to believe it was true, and that Lily had taken her dress from her. But there was no other explanation as to how it had mysteriously gone missing. She reconciled herself to the idea that she'd have to wear another dress to her grandfather's birthday party, because she knew that she absolutely couldn't accuse Lily of being a thief. Brittany loved Lily so much, but now that Lily had taken her dress, she wondered if their friendship would ever be the same again. So there we are, that is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.